The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there, and welcome to today's live learning event. Our subject today is the Constitution Constitution Revision Commission, or affectionately known as the CRC. What is it? What does it do? When does it meet? And what can we do to make sure that the general interest of cities are represented? Today's speaker is the League's Assistant General Counsel, Mr. David Cruz. Many of you may know David as one of the League's lobbyists, but he's also one of our key attorneys and very familiar with the CRC process. Before we get started, I want to go over just a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, today's session is being recorded. The link to the recording will be emailed out to all of our registered attendees as well as posted on our website under the FLC University page. For those of you who are joining us live, please feel free to download copies of today's presentation via the dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. It's about halfway down. It'll say Documents or Handouts. You can also submit questions via the Raise Your Hand feature, or you can use the chat function at the bottom of that same navigation panel to either give us feedback, ask questions, whatever you want to share. Questions will be read aloud and answered during the course of the presentation. If you are joining us via our on-demand learning library, welcome. If you have questions or feedback at the conclusion of viewing today's presentation, you can email David directly via his email address. It is dcruz, C-R-U-Z, at flcities.com. And that email address will be shown on the final screen of today's presentation. With that, thank you for joining us, and please welcome David.
Thank you, Holly, and good afternoon. Hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Now that elections are past us, the League of Cities is not only diligently working on the upcoming legislative session, but we are also equally working on what is a equally important but rarely used process known as the Constitution Revision Commission. So during today's presentation, I hope to cover three topics or three areas of focus. First and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and go over what the Constitution Revision Commission is, what it does, and how it works. Second, I'm going to go ahead and go over what the Florida League of Cities strategy will be in approaching the CRC process. And lastly, I hope to leave our listeners with what is affectionately a little homework assignment that could assist the League of Cities as we prepare for the upcoming CRC process. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and jump right into it and start covering what the CRC process is. Florida actually has 5 different ways to amend our Constitution. You're probably more familiar with 2 of the ways that the Constitution is usually amended. Firstly, the Florida legislature, through the bill process, passing legislation is usually how the Constitution is amended. Lately, another process that has been used a lot has been the initiative process or the ballot initiative process, and that is where our citizens can go ahead and gather a certain number of signatures and petition to get something put on the ballot. We just saw that recently during the general election. There was an amendment on there dealing with solar energy, for example. I'm sure many of you voted on that amendment, so that was put on there by the ballot initiative process. So those are the 2 ways we usually see constitutional amendments. However, another equally important method that is rarely used is what is known as the CRC process. Actually, Florida is the only state in the country that has what is a CRC process. And so essentially, what the CRC process is a commission. It's made up of 37 people that are appointed. It only meets once every 20 years. So this will only be the 3rd time in Florida's history that we will be having a CRC. So keep in mind this happens once every 20 years. It is not a common occurrence, but it is equally as important, if not more important, than what the legislative process is for amending Florida's Constitution. If you think about it for a second, the CRC will literally have the ability to oversee everything of our daily lives, everything from the environment to taxes to how local government operates can all be within the purview of the CRC. So things that we've worked extremely hard to protect, things like home rule, unfunded mandates, those can all be possible topics of discussion for the CRC. So the CRC is 37 people. They're appointed. They meet once every 20 years, and they get to place amendments directly on the ballot. Once they're on the ballot, they'll be on the 2018 general election ballot. They'll need 60% voter approval to pass. That's the same as any other constitutional amendment now. One big difference, though, between the CRC and the ballot initiative process, though, is that the CRC process does not have to adhere to the single subject requirement. So a ballot initiative has to pertain to only one subject, and it has to go before the Florida Supreme Court to get single subject approval, so to speak. CRC does not do that. They, like the legislature, get to place the amendment directly onto the ballot without any court review. So that's an important notice, an important difference to note. What we do expect is that the 37 people will be appointed sometime in February. Actually, there's been some interesting discussion on when exactly the appointments will be made. Florida's Constitution says that they are made 30 days before the start of session. However, there could be a differing interpretation that it could be any time between the 30 days prior to the start of session, not exactly 30 days before session. Actually, the governor's office has given some indication that they will likely be making the appointments in early March, going with the second interpretation. So we will have our CRC appointments made before the start of this year's legislative session in any case. So how does one get appointed to the CRC? There's actually 15 appointments made by Governor Rick Scott. Of those 15 appointments, Governor Rick Scott will be electing or choosing the chair of the CRC. So he gets 15 appointments. One of his 15s will serve as chair for the CRC. 9 appointments are done by the Speaker of the House, which will be Speaker Richard Corcoran. 9 appointments will be made by Senate President Joe Negron. 3 appointments will be made by Chief Justice Jorge Labarga of the Florida Supreme Court. And then the Attorney General herself would get to serve on the CRC. So what will the CRC be doing? Well, actually, that's an interesting subject all of its own. The Florida Constitution actually provides very little guidance on what the CRC does and how it operates. What it does say is that the CRC gets to adopt its own rules at its first meeting. So there are no standing rules. So there's no standing procedures. We don't know how many times they'll meet, when they'll meet, where they'll meet. We could look at past CRCs to give us some guidance on how the procedure will operate, but we must note that the important thing is that they get to adopt their own rules. The Constitution does say that they get to examine the Constitution of the state. The Constitution requires that they hold public hearings, and ultimately their amendments will be placed on the 2018 general election ballot. Now, looking back at previous CRCs, I have a diagram up of the 1997-1998 CRC, and this gives you an idea of how the process worked in 97 and 98. This will perhaps give us some clues as to how this CRC, the 2017-2018 CRC, will be working from a procedural standpoint. So they would likely hold an organizational meeting sometime in June. Then they had public hearings that were scheduled throughout the state of Florida where they tried to get voter input and public participation so that members of the public could attend these meetings and provide feedback and provide ideas to the CRC members as to what they would like to see changed in Florida's Constitution. Then they went ahead and brought all those ideas back to Tallahassee, and they held a series of meetings broken down into a committee type format where there's 37 people. Let's break it down into smaller groups that focus on different topic areas, and then they would need to get a certain number of votes to approve an idea to get out of the committee process and then eventually be voted on by the full commission. Eventually the full commission would take votes on any of the proposed ideas, and those ideas that pass would be on the November ballot. So that's how the 97-98 CRC operated. We would expect something similar to happen with the 2017-2018 CRC, but again, keep in mind that they get to adopt their own rules at their first meeting, and so we can only look at the past CRCs for guidance. Looking at the past CRCs, I think it's helpful to kind of look at where we've come from so that we could understand where we're going. And we look at the past 2 CRCs, and we could note an interesting difference. During this 1977-1978, the CRC passed 8 proposals, but not a single one of those proposals was approved by the voters when it made it to the ballot. In stark contrast, though, in 1997-1998, 9 proposals were adopted by the CRC, and 8 of those successfully were adopted by the voters. So that's a pretty big difference between 77 and 97. And I think one of the key takeaways from that is that the CRC members realized that it was a lot more than just passing ideas and getting it on the ballot. They needed to raise voter awareness. They needed to institute a campaign to get voters aware of what the changes that they were proposing were. And so I think that made a big difference. One thing to note, though, that will be very different from the 77 and 97 one to the 2017 CRC is that the previous two CRCs, when they needed voter approval, they only needed 50% voter approval. Well, now we have changed Florida's constitution in 2006 to require 60% voter approval for a constitutional amendment. So we'll need 60% voter approval now versus the 50% threshold that was required for past CRCs. So, like I said, they get to adopt their own rules, and so we have somewhat of an idea of what the process will look like once they get going. Well, we know that appointments are going to be made before the start of this year's legislative session. With the holidays right around the corner, that's going to be coming up rather soon, actually, and so we know the appointments will be coming up before the legislative session starts. They'll likely hold an organizational meeting where they adopt their rules sometime in the summer, most likely in June. Remember that legislative session this year ends on May 5th, so this will likely go from us focusing on legislative session to going straight into the CRC process. They'll likely hold public hearings then throughout the summer. Hopefully they'll have those public hearings around the state, and then likely we'll have those final proposals or amendments, proposed amendments getting transmitted to the Secretary of State in May of 2018, and finally voters would be voting on these in the November general election for 2018. So that's an overview of the process of the CRC. That gives you at least a working knowledge of how the CRC will be operating, and hopefully they find that helpful for when you have questions from your own residents and citizens. However, I wanted to go ahead and take it a little bit further and let you know what the Florida League of Cities has been doing as far as developing a game plan to hopefully influence the CRC process itself. And we've broken that down into 3 components. The first component is that we're looking to influence the appointment process. We feel that it is vitally important that someone with municipal experience is appointed onto the CRC. During the 97-98 CRC, Clarence Anthony, who is now the Executive Director of the National League of Cities, he's a former mayor, he served on the CRC, and we thought that was extremely beneficial to have a voice on the CRC that represented Florida's municipalities. We feel that's equally important this time around, and so the Florida League of Cities, during our annual conference in August, adopted a resolution urging the people making the appointments, the governor, the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, to take into consideration having someone appointed onto the CRC that has municipal experience. Now, we recognize that getting appointed onto the CRC is an extremely political process in and of itself. There's 37 appointments for what will likely have hundreds of applicants trying to get onto the CRC. We can assure you that every single special interest group in Tallahassee has been diligently working to try to get someone appointed onto the CRC themselves. And so we're not the only group out there trying to influence the CRC appointment process. And to that end, the Florida League of Cities Board of Directors actually discussed this very topic at our last board meeting. And the Board of Directors took a position to support our league president, Susan Haney, Mayor of Boca Raton, with her application to the CRC. Mayor Haney, President Haney, has applied to Governor Rick Scott to serve on the CRC. The Board of Directors took a position to adopt her application and recognize that this is an extremely political process. It is extremely difficult to get appointed, and if we stand behind one candidate, we have a much better chance of getting someone appointed onto the CRC. And so that's the position that the Board of Directors took, and that's been the board position. So once appointments are made, we're hoping to influence the CRC process itself. So that'll be the second arm of our strategy. We'll be looking to take polls of different issues that are important to our members or important to the public. We'll be looking to develop a team, whether it's different consultants that could help us to influence the CRC process itself. We'll also be looking to develop a process by which our members, after all, we are a member-driven organization, will be able to vet issues for us that benefit municipal government. And so we would likely get a group together of city elected officials, city attorneys, city managers that would help us and assist us in vetting issues that the CRC will be considering. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and jump into a little bit of what the CRC homework assignment is, as I've mentioned earlier. We're hoping to get as much help as possible with the CRC process. It's an extremely, extremely important process that can likely affect every aspect of government in Florida. And to that end, we are hoping that to recognize officials that have relationships with the members making the appointments to the CRC. So if you have a working relationship with Governor Rick Scott, with Senate President Joe Negron, or with Speaker Richard Corcoran, we would ask you to contact League staff, contact myself, David Cruz, or contact Scott Dudley, and we would love to incorporate you into our comprehensive strategy as we look to influence appointments onto the CRC. Once the CRC is actually appointed, then the League is going to go ahead and try to influence the CRC process itself. And in order to do that, we think one of the best ways to do that is to create what is, for lack of a better term, a key contact program. We would have 37 members appointed onto the CRC. Almost all of these members would likely be from a municipality and live in a municipality. And so, for example, if a businessman from the city of Tallahassee is appointed onto the CRC, we would like to reach out to the city commission, the city officials in the city of Tallahassee, and ask them if they have a relationship with that businessman that got appointed onto the CRC. And we would like to then use you as a key contact to be able to work with that individual member of the CRC to assist us in advocating for Florida's municipalities. So that would be the second prong of our homework assignment. So once those appointments come out, please be paying attention. We would be reaching out to those cities that have CRC members that got appointed onto the CRC. And then lastly, we strongly believe that they'll likely hold public hearings or public meetings all across the state. They would likely get public input on any of the proposals they're going to go ahead and consider. And we think it is extremely important for our city officials to be engaged and to participate at those public hearings or public meetings. And so if there's a public meeting that the CRC holds in your area, we would ask you and encourage you to attend that CRC meeting. We would encourage you as well to participate, and if there's an opportunity for public comment, then we would ask you to please go ahead and comment and give feedback to the CRC members so that they understand why an issue is important to municipalities and how it imports how cities work in Florida. After all, you're the city elected officials. You are the experts in knowing how a proposal could affect your city, and those CRC members are usually looking to find out how those proposals would work in real life, and hopefully you could provide some excellent feedback to that end. And so with that, I'll be happy to open it up for questions. I realize this was a pretty quick presentation today. Usually when we do this one at the local league meetings, we have a lot of questions and answers, and it takes a lot longer. But if you guys have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, David. The first one that came in was, where can we access the FLC CRC resolution or any other materials?
That's a great question. It's actually something I wanted to cover, so thank you so much for asking that. The Florida League of Cities is actually revamping our website. We'll have a new website up and available shortly. Once that new website has been published, we will have the resolution, we will have a letter that the Board of Directors went ahead and authored and sent to Governor Rick Scott in support of Mayor Susan Haney's CRC application. We'll have all the CRC information available online, but if you would like to receive it immediately, please see my email address there. Feel free to send me an email and I'll be happy to send that to you today.
Okay, with that, we will open up the floor for questions. You can either submit it through the chat function, or on your screen there's a little icon that looks like a little hand raised. You can do it there as well. If not, I don't see any coming in, so as David said, you can submit your questions directly to him. His email address is on the screen, and for those of you who have joined us via our on-demand learning library, please let us know what questions you might have or any feedback. Thank you very much.